Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is Cy Rogers and I'm your host for today's program. Now, unless you've lived in a cave, you've already noticed pornography is everywhere. It flashes at you at the grocery checkout counter. It tries to lasso you as you surf the internet. It slips in at the most unexpected moments, like when you're watching the Super Bowl or innocently flipping through the TV channels trying to find something worth watching, and there it is. Its images taunt you, even from the sports page of the newspaper, and those images tend to ignite the dark places of imagination, unexpectedly, even casually watching the latest must-see film. The lure is so powerful and so pervasive, especially in today's culture, that few people have any clue how to quench it, let alone stop it. Well, while pondering this problem in today's culture is today's guest, Steve Siler, and he had an idea. Steve is a Dove Award-winning Christian songwriter. Maybe you've heard of him. But he himself also struggled with a sexual addiction history. And Steve thought, wouldn't it be great to pull together some of the best singers and songwriters and create music for the soul? Music that speaks to broken people about God's cleansing and healing power. He called his new company Music for the Soul, appropriately enough, but he didn't stop there. He gathered together testimonies from regular folk who've been ensnared by pornography, as well as Christian leaders who teach on the subject. And then he wove their narratives in between the music. Well, what emerged is a powerful new form of ministry, especially to people trapped by their sexuality, believer and non-believer alike. It's a CD called Somebody's Daughter. We'll be telling you later in the program how you can get a copy of this powerful new CD resource. Recently, we sat down with Steve Siler and asked him about his life and about the CD that he put together with artists such as Clay Cross and teachers like Dennis Rainey. You'll want to know more, so stay tuned.
Pure passion that beats for Christ alone.
I'm often asked, what does the Bible say about God's intention for human sexuality? Well, I'm so glad when they ask that, because that's like the question that must get answered if we're to live free from sexual brokenness. Because if you understand why He made us male and female, then that gives you the wherewithal to resist the temptations that come, because you have a structured purpose for living within those parameters. You know, God's omniscience makes everything He does filled with purpose and intent. There's one thing God cannot say, and that's oops. Everything God does is full of omniscience. It's perfectly wise and has a meaning and a purpose behind it. So when He made us male and female, He did it for a reason, a very important reason. He knew all the problems it would create. I mean, look at the mess in marital relationships today. And yet He did it anyway. That must mean that the reason He did it is all the more important. You see, in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, He makes it very clear. We were created in God's image, male and female, for the purpose of going in heterosexual monogamous pairs, so as to symbolize the love that Christ has the church and the ultimate marriage that will take place when Christ comes for us again. You see, back in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, Eve was taken out of Adam's side. And it says there in that passage, for this reason. For what reason? Because Eve was taken out of Adam's side. For that reason, the two must become one flesh again. You see, in nature, if you pull anything apart that naturally is a one thing, it will have the natural tendency to try to go back together again and become one again. Just so, when God took Eve out of Adam's side, He set up a tendency for the two to reunite again and become one again. So that's why it says in Genesis chapter 2, for this reason, the two must become one flesh again. Why? Because Eve was taken from his side. For that reason, she must return to him and become one flesh with him again. That is a call to heterosexual monogamy. It takes the woman and the man to achieve that, and it's one woman and one man that achieves that one flesh union. Heterosexual monogamy from the beginning, found in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. Jesus reiterated this command in Matthew 19, emphasizing that the two must become one. He even repeated the passage from Genesis chapter 2. God condemns every departure from this model for what it does to society, for what it does to our bodies, and for what it does to His image in us. You see, physical sexuality is a human enactment of a greater spiritual reality, that of Christ and His church, the bridegroom and the bride. Satan wants not only the image of God in our sexuality marred, he also wants this picture of Christ and the bride marred. The sexual act in marriage is to be as much a spiritual act as it is to be a physical act. That is why the enemy bombards our minds with degrading sexual images and relegates sexuality to the realms of darkness in our thinking, where God is actually denied, feared, and ignored. In faithful monogamous marital relations, we are ingraining the pattern of intimate faithfulness into our minds and hearts and setting it as an example for the world to follow. We are bringing glory to the image of God. We are displaying the image of God on this earth through our human sexuality. And we are prefiguring the marriage that Christ will have with you and I, the bride of Christ, at the end when He returns.
I think the most damaging side effect of pornography is that it allows somebody to view someone who's a child of God without seeing the humanity. I always tell people that every woman they look at is someone Christ died for, a precious child of God, and deserves to be treated as such and respected as such and loved as such. And as soon as you start objectifying women and start seeing them only for whatever gratification they will give you, just in a physical sense, then you start to lose sight of the spiritualness of that person and of the heart of that person and the soul of that person. And so I think that diminishes them and it diminishes the viewer as well. It's idolatry, and the other thing it is, and I think that a lot of guys don't want to admit to, is that it's adultery as well. It may just be one-dimensional adultery, but the fact of the matter is you are giving your heart and your passion that's meant for your spouse. You're giving that to somebody else, and when you do that, it's an affair of the heart, and that's adultery. And I think the Bible is very, very clear about that. So I'm always surprised when people think, well, I'm not hurting anybody, and it's just entertainment. And hold on, we need to rethink that. One of the things that I tell people a lot of the time is that when they're viewing the pornography, a lot of times it's a second victimization for the person who's being looked at, because a lot of the women who participate in those films come from a background of sexual abuse. So they've been abused as young ladies, as children growing up, have developed unhealthy, broken sexual identity, and then step into this other world and are abused all over again in the fact that they're victimized and objectified that way. So it's just a pattern, and the people who are looking at it are participating in continuing that pattern. I read in Fred Stoker's book about that was the first time I read it, and then I read it again in Marnie Farie's book about the chemical effect of pornography, and it's actually not unlike cocaine addiction in that sense, that there is a high there. And so many of the people that I've talked to who counsel in this area say that it's progressive, that people start out maybe as young men, they find their dad's Playboy stash. And then after several months or a year or two, that's not enough. So they move up to maybe a more hardcore magazine. And then now they need video. And then pretty soon they're into hard films and maybe eventually onto prostitutes. That like any other drug related effect, you need more and more and more. And what used to satisfy, the longer you do it, doesn't satisfy. And that's why pornography is a very slippery slope and so dangerous, because you're being pulled deeper and deeper into this habit. Absolutely sets you up for disappointment in the marriage bed if you've viewed pornography beforehand, because, look at it this way. The women in those films are not going to make you dinner. They're not going to change your baby's diaper. They're not going to support you and help you strive towards your goals. It doesn't cost them anything to be in a relationship with you. And it doesn't cost you anything to be in a relationship with them, because you don't have to do anything for them. There's no commitment there. So you go into your marriage and you've got this fantasy that you're just going to be served this way, and that there's nothing that's expected from you in return. Well, that's unrealistic. And of course, it's unrealistic to expect somebody who's taking care of your kids all day, who's cooked you a nice meal, who's helped you pay the bills, driven kids back and forth to school, whatever the case may be, that at 9:30 at night or 10 o'clock at night, when her day's going to start again at 5 in the morning, if it doesn't get interrupted in the middle of the night by the baby crying, that now at 10 o'clock at night she's going to suddenly become this vixen from some porn movie you once watched. It's not real. And she's going to wonder, what's wrong with me that I can't satisfy my husband? She's going to feel like she's doing something wrong when in fact she's not. And it's also a situation in terms of the things that she might be asked to do. A lot of women have told me that they will try some of those things because they want to please their husband, and then they wind up feeling as if they're going against their God, they're going against their own sense of what's right, and so they become confused. It's just, like I said, it's a very slippery slope, and it does not end well. There's no way it can end well. You've got men who, are expecting their wives to behave in a certain way, and what's so sad about that to me is that there is nothing more gratifying than true intimacy between a man and a woman. I mean, God designed this. This is one of the greatest gifts that God has given to us. And when you are truly in love with somebody in a committed relationship where you respect each other, where you appreciate each other's counsel, where you share time together, and you build history together, all of that increases sexual satisfaction because you come to each other wanting to give and wanting to pour love out for one another. And pornography doesn't create any of those scenarios. Quite the reverse.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone. Your passion, nothing less.
The problem is that people, they think it's not costing them anything. And of course that's the biggest lie of all, because they're paying a very, very steep price. They're losing, not only are they losing intimacy with their spouse, they're losing intimacy with God. I can't imagine any man who's enjoying pornography on Saturday night is going to be able to open up himself in worship on Sunday morning with any degree of honesty or vulnerability, because he knows what he's done is wrong. I mean, there's no question in my mind that people who are participating in this, one of the key elements of pornography is shame. And it's why it's so quiet and so secretive. And so it's very unlikely that that person is going to be involved in something that causes so much shame on one day and then the next morning is going to be wide, open to worship. And that's a shame. You're cutting yourself off not just from your spouse and your family, but from God. Well, we have a problem, I think, in our culture, just for men in particular, with intimacy in general. Not just intimacy man and woman, man and wife, intimacy male friend to male friend, intimacy man to God. And I think that one of the things that I really would want to encourage people about is that when you're willing to bring yourself out into the open with people, and when you're willing to risk, it's not easy. You got to risk. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I know it sounds corny, but there's a reason people say stuff like that. If you will be honest, I would suggest if somebody's dealing with this issue in particular, to pick one male friend that they feel like that would go to the mat with them. One male friend that they feel like there might be something there, and get with that guy and be honest. Anybody worth their salt, any man worth his salt, if he talks to another man privately about this, the guy's going to go, man, I know what you mean. It's tough. Everywhere I turn, it's in the media, it's on the billboards, it's on the magazines, it's on the TV. You wake up in this country, or any country, you wake up in the morning and you have to decide before you leave the door to go out into the world what you're going to look at, what you're not, because it is going to assault you on a daily basis. There's no doubt about that. So you need to have an accountability partner. You need to have somebody that you can be real with about that. And I think, perhaps for some guys it would be harder to be intimate with a male friend than with a woman, or vice versa. I don't know, but I think you got to pick somebody. And I don't think we can ever really be intimate with God, because that's a personal relationship as well, until we practice intimacy in our one-to-one earthly relationships. Absolutely. It's just a matter of preparedness. It's a matter of going on the offensive and making the decision, today I'm going to see some things. There are going to be some things that are going to come at me that I know aren't good for me, that I know I don't want to look at, that I know I don't want to be involved in. So I'm going to decide before they happen that when that image comes up, I'm going to click that remote. I'm going to turn that TV off. I'm going to change the channel. When I see that woman walking across the street, instead of luring, after her and watching her walk for 30 seconds, I'm going to go, she's beautiful, but I'm going to look over here. You know, that's a child of God. She's beautiful, but that's all I'm going to think about it. I'm not going to go into a bedroom fantasy over it. You need to make those decisions going into the day so that you don't get caught off guard and, oops, what do I do now? Because, you know, sometimes you can be responding inappropriately before you even have a chance to think. So it's a decision that you make beforehand. For me, it has been a men's prayer group. I have a men's prayer group that meets every Tuesday morning. I can say just honestly, without it, I think I'd be adrift. I go to church every week, and I like church fine. But where I really get the meat and potatoes in my life spiritually is from this group of about 5 guys. We meet every Tuesday morning, and nothing's out of bounds. We talk about it all. We talk about parenting. We talk about being spouses. We always pray for our wives every week. We talk about our careers, and we talk about our failings. And we lift each other up, and we walk alongside, and we're accountable. And just knowing that there are 4 guys out there who are going to ask me and look me in the eye and are going to know if I'm bluffing, you know, and guys that I can trust. And I know that I can say to them, man, I failed again. And I know that it's not going to go any further than that, that this is a group. We've been together now going on 9 years. And I would encourage every man watching, if you don't have that, you need that. Seek that out. It will be the biggest blessing you've ever had. And I've found that by the example of these men and being able to celebrate their victories and all of us growing closer in our walk, that gives us the incentive to be able to do better individually. One of the first things that you need to do, and one of the things that's hardest to do in our culture, the way we live in America, where we've got a cell phone and we got a laptop and we're always connected, I think is making time. Like anything that worth doing, a relationship takes time, and a relationship with Christ takes time that is devoted to Christ. A time where you say, I'm not going to answer the phone, I'm not going to look at the email, this is a quiet time. If you need to go off, take a walk in the woods, or wherever you need to go, to know that this time is not going to be interrupted. For me, it helps to read Scripture. I find, just for me personally, when I'm walking out in the woods, something happens in my prayer, and I'm able to just start praying, and I can pray and lose a whole hour because I'm surrounded by the beauty that God has made. So that really works for me. But I think everybody has to find that way that they have of setting time aside. But I think that's what the key is it being set aside. And what I've found is once you've done a little bit of that, then it gets a little bit easier to be kind of connected all the time. And I'm in the middle of a crazy busy time, and I can kind of take a deep breath and go, okay, I know you're here with me too, you know. And that's I've sensed a profound change in my life over the last several years in that area, which is really a blessing.
A heart that beats for Christ alone. Your passion, nothing less I will offer you.
We just don't do a very good job of talking openly about sex in our country in general, let alone the church. We use it to sell. We use sex to sell everything. And we have no problem being salacious with it and titillating with it. But when it comes down to being real about it, we just don't do very well. And it cracks me up because the same people who won't talk about sex on Sunday morning will go home and watch an NFL game on Sunday afternoon with the cheerleaders shaking it and with the commercials bumping and grinding, looking at all kinds of sexual imagery, you know, just after they leave church, a half an hour later. There's a disconnect. What I think the church needs to do, first of all, when Christ talks about bringing stuff out into the light, I mean, in the light, evil flees. Evil flees the truth, and the truth will set us free, right? So you bring the stuff out into the light, immediately you disempower it. This is a gross image, but it works for me. Have you ever been in a house and you flick on a light and there are cockroaches everywhere? And the minute the light comes on, whoosh, they just hightail, they're gone. Seconds, they're gone. I think it's the same thing with this. I think you turn the light of truth and Christ's love on Satan in this area, and he's going to hightail it. And I think that's what the church has not done. They have not been willing to come out and say, this is a problem. It's a problem for the church. We're going to turn the light on. We're going to meet it with grace, not condemnation. We're going to meet it with mercy and not judgment. And we are going to shut this thing down. And we're going to go on the offensive to make sure that all you men are mentoring your sons so that as they grow up into this culture, they have what they need to fight against it. And we're going to teach you how to be better husbands so that your wives will be blessed in their physical relationship too. I mean, I just think we've been afraid of this. What's interesting about this is I think if you would ask churches what their purpose is, they would say it's to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right? I mean, I think that's what churches would say. I would argue this. If you meet somebody with the love of Christ, the forgiveness, the mercy, all the good stuff, at their deepest point of need, at their most despairing, at their most shame and guilt-ridden, if you meet them there with Jesus and He redeems them from that place, how much of the truth, how much of the gospel are they going to speak to the other people in their lives? You won't be able to shut them up because they will have a Jesus experience that's profound and real and truly life-changing. And I think the church is missing it here. I think we would have people who would truly convert to Christianity. Not just accept Christ and then go on their merry way and live the way they always have, but truly convert if they meet Jesus in that place. And the church ought to be willing to go there, not just on pornography, but on any abuse issue, on any addiction issue. I think that they need to have an ongoing ministry present in the church. I know that a lot of churches will do like they'll have a weekend or they'll have a, and I've actually called places and said, we have a new record on pornography. Oh, well, we did pornography 6 months ago and we're not doing it again until 2007. And I'm like, oh, well, that's great because, of course, there isn't any pornography anywhere out in the world today. It's not coming back until 2.5 years. That's not the answer. We have to have an ongoing ministry presence in churches where if somebody, and I know a lot of people don't want to walk into their church because they think everybody knows them here. This isn't where I want to confess. I don't want to be seen coming and going from the counselor's office. I would encourage churches to have off-site counseling support. The pastor can't be expected to be an expert on every issue under the sun. But there isn't any reason why a pastor could not find a counseling center close by, or several, and have all the issues covered so that if somebody comes to him, he can say, I know somebody that you can speak to about this. And having the resources on hand, like the music that we do and like all the excellent books that are out there, having some resources, some way to get people connected. And then the next thing you got to do is you got to stand up and you got to say it in every bulletin every week, and you got to say it from the pulpit. We are a church who cares about hurting people. If you're addicted, if you're being abused, if you're sick, if you're, whatever it is, we want to help, and you will always be met with grace and mercy here. Please do not suffer another day longer. We beg you.
Like Steve said, it is a sobering thing to realize that the girl you've been lusting after is actually somebody's daughter. She has a daddy and a mommy, as well as hopes and dreams. She has eternal value as a child of God. She is someone Jesus saw and loved when He died on that cross 2,000 years ago. He still loves her today. The same is true for any boy who's become the object of someone's lust. He too is loved of God. His Father in heaven cares a great deal about his welfare. One of the ways we can get free from sexually addictive obsessions is to come to this realization that people belong to God, not us for our enjoyment in that way. We've got to stop depersonalizing people, realize that we're not allowed to lust after them and make them objects to satisfy our appetites. That's not love. In the greater family of God, they're our brothers and sisters, our sons and our daughters. To lust after them really becomes quite unthinkable in the context of the greater reality. We begin to see people like God sees them, as His children. And when we realize this, it begins to help us break the power of lust. Now, if you have been lusting after somebody's son or daughter, I want you to also know that God has come not to condemn you, but to set you free. He understands what's going on here, and He's died for you, and He's taken the punishment of your sin upon Himself. God doesn't hate you. He loves you deeply. And if you will turn to Him, repent of your sin, become accountable and responsible for your behavior, Jesus is ready to be the Lord and Savior of your life. Even the Bible says, though your sins have been like scarlet red, He will wash you and make you white and clean like snow. Not only that, He'll come and live within you. He'll give you grace and guidelines. He'll empower you to resist the evil one who may tempt you back to old familiar paths. He'll give you spiritual eyes to begin to see life in purity and beauty without having to lust after it or fixate on it. Seek Him in prayer. Maybe you need to get some accountability and help. Pursue God also in the Scriptures this week. Listen for His voice. It's a voice that says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. You know, if you need more resources, then please visit us here at www.purepassion.us. Until next week, I'm Cy Rogers. For all of us here at Pure Passion, my privilege to say, God bless and keep you.
You made her together, your cherished creation. Made her body a temple for the soul. Why can't I appreciate the beauty that your hands have made and maintain my self-control? Because when I see only flesh, you're looking at her heart. There is so much more to her than meets the eye. I need to remember she's somebody's daughter, somebody's